Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to the Regenerative Soil Series. I'm Abby Rose, co-founder of VitaCycle. We make digital tools to support regenerative farming, and that includes Soil Mentor, which is an app that helps farmers to learn what healthy soils and flourishing biodiversity look like on their farms. Soil Mentor helps to monitor and record changes above and below ground. Then you can use these observations to make informed decisions and keep everyone in the loop. This new series of webinars, this is the second one, is exploring the conversation around soil and taking a regenerative approach to farming through the lens of observation. Over the years, we've noticed a pattern that many people who have a lot of success farming regeneratively are very confident taking the time to make observations. They're confident taking the time to really look at their surroundings and then use those observations to inform their learning and decision-making. We've also noticed that many people are very cautious about spending time observing, as it can feel like unproductive or a waste of time when they could be out really doing something. So this series aims to highlight the power of observation, where and when observation can be a highly valuable tool, and how observation has become a key part of our guests' on-farm regenerative toolkit. So this is our second interview of the series, and it's with the ever-inspirational Clare Hill. We got to know Clare when you were using Soil Mentor as part of the first research trial in the UK, where you were investigating adaptive multi-paddock grazing on FAI farm in Oxfordshire. Since then, Clare has gone on to start her own farming enterprise, Planton Farm in Shropshire, and Clare also helped to create and run the Roots to Regeneration, which is a 2-year-long course helping people to learn what it takes to farm with a regenerative approach. So thanks so much, Clare, for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I would love if you could introduce yourself and maybe tell us a bit about your farm today. And then we could also, it'd be great to hear a bit about the Roots to Regeneration course.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, everybody. So yeah, I'm Clare Hill from Planton Farm in Shropshire, South Shropshire, just off the side of Clare Hill, for those that know it. I am here today. That's where I am. I saw that Lily had put where she was tonight. So I am in Shropshire on a windy, rainy hill. I'm not sitting in a wonderful field with lots of cows in the background, but that is our farm, and that they are our cattle in our tall grass regenerative grazing system. So on the farm, we're a small farm, 80 acres, although I always feel like when I talk to people in cities, when I say small farm, of course, in farming terms, it's small, but in everybody else terms, that's a huge amount of land. And that became our inspiration when we came here, as far as how can we grow as much as possible? Like, could we support our family just off 80 acres? Because most people would say you can't make a living off 80 acres. So our approach to that is to harvest as much sunlight and as much rainfall as possible, and to turn that into productivity. And one way we do that is kind of stacking enterprises, because on a small farm, 80 acres, we're limited to the number of cows we can have, but we've got suckler cattle enterprise, we do beef direct, we've got meat chickens, we sell all our chicken direct, we've got laying hens, we also have a dual purpose chicken project, because dual purpose is not kind of commercialized at the moment in the UK, anyway, across the world. My colleague Annie goes to China and she goes to talk about dual purpose chicken, and they go, don't you just mean chicken? Like, we've never even taken chicken from being something that laid eggs and then you could eat it as a meat bird, whereas of course in the Western world we've separated the two and made the genetics very strong in either direction or another. So we have dual purpose chickens as well, and we're experimenting with that and a project called Impeccable Poultry with some Innovate UK funding. We also have quite a lot of agroforestry on the farm. Anyone that's seen the Met Office report for 2050 shows consecutive temperatures of days and weeks of temperatures in the mid-40s, and we know that cow fertility starts to fade at around 20 degrees, if not a bit lower. So from a future thinking productivity point of view, we're all about trees, and both standard trees like oaks, etc., but also fruit trees. And to that end, we've put in a replanted an orchard that we could see was here on old maps, but also put in a 1 hectare forest garden where we've got about 300 trees, 70 different varieties, all growing food of some variety. So when you see some people on certain forums quoting that you can't eat trees, there's no point planting all these trees, we can't eat them. Well, the truth is we can, and our animals can, and they can get shade, shelter from them too. So we describe ourselves as a productive, regenerative, I guess, perennial and livestock farm. That's what we do. We grow perennial food and livestock. And then on the roots to regeneration side, I only farmed regeneratively since about 2019. There was no one moment, but a kind of stacking of moments that made me think differently. And through that process, it was really tough at times, including letters from the landlord to say we weren't doing things right, and a lot of other things along the way. So I took that experience and got together with my coach, Caroline Grinrod, and we launched Roots to Regeneration. So we work with both farmers and professionals, people, anyone in the food, farming, fibre and finance industries, we would say, that are interested in regenerative agriculture, a 2-year in-depth transition programme. I think that's it for now.
Amazing. Yeah, and well, we'll come back to some of that coaching element you just mentioned there very lightly, but I wanted to dive straight in because one of the things that you shared was that in the Roots to Regeneration course, you talk about one of the things you cover is different ways of knowing. And I just love to hear a bit about, what are those ways of knowing and how does observation fit into that? Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a few kind of different people or philosophers that talk about different ways of knowing. And I'd never even heard of that, like I didn't really know what that meant. But I kind of thought I'll pick on one example. So Carl Jung, he has 4 ways of knowing. He would say thinking, which I think is the one we're all most familiar with, the knowledge, the information that we hold on to in our brains, that people write in books and we learn and we repeat, that type of knowledge. But there is actually also, on top of thinking, there is sensing, feeling, and intuition, he would categorize them as. And I think that, yeah, I'd lived very much in that kind of scientific field of work. So it was all about the thinking, and almost to the point of the sensing, the feeling, and the intuition maybe had been dismissed. And so we talk about these things in Roots to Regeneration because we're just trying to give them validity. Often people have an intuition about something, but if there's a scientific paper that says the opposite to that, then I think in society we're encouraged to go with what the version is in the paper rather than go with what our intuition might be telling us. And so, yeah, we bring them about in the program as a way, just as, to give, like I say, some validity so that people go, oh, actually, I do feel differently about that. Or I am getting a different sense of that, or I feel something around that. Now, it's the way in which that kind of it feels into observation is because it is a lot more about just kind of like, oh, I've seen the cows doing that. I've spent the time observing that, and that I'm getting a sense of this. So I'm now seeing that actually maybe we could do more or less of this. And I think another important part of it is when starting out on a regenerative journey, certainly for me, there wasn't the facts and the knowledge and the knowns and the statistics to tell us what to do. Therefore, we had to tune into a lot more about intuition actually, and sensing and thinking, this sort of feels like the right thing to do, even though it's not totally proven everywhere. So that kind of helped me start to tune in to those other ways of knowing.
Totally. And I definitely can see that by having the framework of these are different ways of knowing and putting sensing, feeling, and intuition on the same level as knowledge or thinking, I think you called it.
Yeah.
It gives them a validity that often has been overlooked for a long time, certainly in recent years or recent decades, let's say.
Yes.
So yeah, that's really cool. And maybe can you share any examples of where maybe a specific observation led you to making different decisions or a breakthrough moment in your understanding? Or do you have any specific examples?
Yes. There's a few. I think one would be there's a few. The one I wanted to talk about was there's a BBC Scotland documentary program, This Farming Life. It's brilliant. I love it. We all watch it as a family. But there was an episode a while ago, and it was all about the snow in the it was all about the snow. It was a really snowstorm, and loads of people worrying. They were struggling because the lambs were dying, and it was really difficult and everything else. And I was watching it, and I felt, we did Beast from the East and lambing, and that was one of my poignant moments of like, we've got to do it differently, because Beast from the East nearly killed me and everybody on that farm that year. But I was watching it, and of course the weather was being blamed. And in the past, I would have blamed the weather too. Oh my God, the weather's so bad. It shouldn't be like this at this point in the spring. It's the weather's fault. And now when I look at it with a kind of different sensing and feeling, it's like, but where are the trees? So there's sheep lambing in these huge open fields with absolutely no protection. And if there was trees, that would be different. And I think that's the sort of kind of sensing example that's come in, and other things around our own our own sheep at the time and our own cattle now, seeing things like we've got we're a suckler herd. They run as a family group. We don't wean, we do natural weaning for welfare reasons. There's no stress time, but also we're not that big. We don't have many fields, and we're trying to rest the ground or build as much rest into our rotation as possible, and therefore having one big group makes it easier. And then that often there's lots of factual knowledge reasons why you shouldn't do that, because maybe the finishing animals aren't going to grow at an optimum rate, but our sense is, my feeling is, it's the right thing to do. And then you get some real curveballs, like when we see heifers calve, often mother and grandmother cow will be close by, and they do separate themselves out, and that's something we would never see without observation. And then we see occasionally a cow suckling on a heifer that's just calved. And then everything about our knowing brain absolutely freaks out and says, we shouldn't be seeing this. This is crazy. We need to separate them. And then, but that cow might be 15 years old. She hasn't suckled since she was a calf. What's going on? But then you realize there may be tuning in. A bit of intuition says, well, maybe the heifer's milk isn't quite right, and she's just drawing the milk down or helping with the process. Obviously, if we come back tomorrow and she's still milking off her daughter, that would be very weird. We might intervene. But actually, at this point, we're going to stand back and observe that and see what happens. And then actually it's okay. And that heifer raises that calf wonderfully well. But if we didn't build in that kind of observation as part of what we do, and we didn't have those other ways of knowing, we would have immediately separated those animals, thinking that this was something falling apart and going wrong, but actually probably part of a natural process.
Totally. And because I know we spoke a little bit about that you also, those kinds of observations out in the field when you're moving the cows, that also is kind of very important in your grazing management. So like on a day-to-day basis, you're adapting your grazing management based off of those observations you're making all the time. So are there also some, how does that work? Because you have a grazing plan, I know, but how do you then adapt it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're almost always walking with our heads down, I think. But yeah, every day. So we have a grazing plan. We sit down now to do our grazing plan for next growing season. So April to October is already planned out. We won't stick to the plan for sure, but we've done the planning process. So we've thought a lot of things through. What if we have another summer like we've just had? What would we do differently? How would we do this? And so every day that we go out to the cows, to move them, not just looking at the next cell they're going into or where they've just been, but looking across the rest of the farm and seeing how everything else is recovering. But specifically when we're going to the cows, we're observing what species they're targeting, what they're really going for. Are they going for the nettles? Why? Did they do it at this time last year? Let's see back. Eating the bracken is always a good one. Massive observation. Acorns, another. It's okay to have a little bit, but we don't want them to poison themselves. And observing what are they eating at this moment, and what are they not, and keeping an eye on that. But really, for grass, every day we're looking to not take away too much. We don't want to overgraze any individual plants. Has a plant had 2 bites or only one? As soon as it's had 2 bites, we know that we've left them in for too long. So we'll adjust the size of the cell. or the timing of the movement. So the observation is like definitely directly linked to productivity of the cattle and how they're growing, but the grass and how we're resting it.
And is the tall grass grazing, has that been effective? Are you excited about it? What is your...
Yeah. Yes. So took our first foray into that was back in 2020 was the first time I let a field of grass go to seed. And that was the biggest sit on your hands moment of anything I've ever done. Weirdly, the hardest thing to do. It almost turns you inside out to think about it. But now we wouldn't do it any other way. I wouldn't. And even when we've talked about maybe working, because we do a few research projects, and people might want to, well, why don't you do set stock grazing or graze it down really low in one field and then really tall in another? And I'm like, no, I can't do that anymore. I just know the benefits for the animals and their gut microbiome, their rumen function. They've evolved now to do really well off it. We're holding on to so much more water. Our root depth is really going. So I actually had someone from Understanding Ag here the other day, and that was great because it was someone else digging a hole and having a look and not me. But yeah, our rooting depth and that kind of crumbly soil going down to quite a depth now really is showing the impact of it. So we didn't fare as badly as everyone else in the drought. I'm not saying we weren't affected, but I feel like the tall grass grazing protected us. And if nothing else, that is worth, hundreds and if not thousands of pounds these days.
Totally. Cool. And so, I mean, yeah, the tall grass grazing is amazing. And even from the photo behind you, it's just so radically different than kind of a more conventional grazing system and what it looks like. So interesting to hear in a way that rooting depth and maybe, or how are you kind of monitoring the effectiveness and how it's affecting your soils? Have you done much of that?
So yeah, we're verified with ecological outcome verification.
Okay, you are.
Yeah, with the Savory Institute. So
Nice.
we are in we've done year 4 now of that. So that's really important for us from an external person coming to the farm and seeing the changes, and also for the part that it's external, but also sometimes when we rely on ourselves to do it on the same date every year, that can be difficult to keep up. So we do that, and what that is, for those that don't know, is it's the best farm audit you'll ever have, because you don't do any paperwork. So an ecologist comes to the farm and they're looking at the ecosystem processes, so the water cycle of effective photosynthesis, etc., things like that. They're looking at indicators that they see both mostly above ground and some below ground. Really similar things in the same way as the soil mentor measures, but they're looking at those and scoring the effectiveness of your ecosystem. And I think that's a great thing for us to do. But more routinely for ourselves is that we, of course, use the soil mentor app, and George, who works on the farm, and I both have that. And so we do it more formally, where once a year we go round and dig holes and look, and then but also kind of tune in, so you start seeing things more often. So yeah, we're seeing rooting depth get better. We're seeing some plant species diversity get much better. So that latent seed bed expressing itself. I never knew what a latent seed bed was until about 4 years ago, but where there's ragwort and dock and everything else under the ground that only grows when you expose the bare soil, that all the good stuff exists too. I never knew that. So we get great swathes now of bird's foot trefoil, which fixes nitrogen at 13 times the rate of clover. We've got quaking sweetgrass and all these other things I didn't even know. So we see this abundance coming now of plant diversity, which then is better for the cows. They're getting a more diverse diet, not so much mineral requirement. We use no anthelmintics because we don't need to, not because we decide not to want to use them. And so that, the water holding capacity, I think, is the biggest thing we're focusing on. So our effective rainfall. So when we're looking at our soil, that's the main thing we're looking at. And so how can we always infiltrate more water and have no runoff would be our aim. Yeah, and yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I feel like a lot of farmers in the UK are in that, or probably around the world are in that position because of weather extremes. It's just becoming more unpredictable. So you need to be resilient, as we always say.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, maybe just going back to when I know you first used Soil Mentor as part of the adaptive multi-paddock grazing trial. And I remember you telling me that because you didn't have the soil lab tests in the beginning, because they're a lagging indicator, you didn't actually have any scientific data. You kind of referred to this earlier as well. And so you didn't know whether it was working, or you couldn't like prove to people that it was working or not for many years. But of course, you could see what was happening. Maybe you could just talk me through that a bit, and what were the indicators that you were seeing, and what was it like starting to understand or starting to build confidence and respect for this observational way of knowing?
Yeah, so that's exactly it. Being part of a scientific organization, doing a scientific project, really wanted data. How much carbon will you sequester? How much daily live weight gain will you get or lose, or anything in between? And we just didn't know early on. So yeah, the observation stuff. So what we saw, well, for example, the story I'll always tell is where that talked about that, where we just let that field grow long, and it was a field that we didn't really value. It was a bit rubbish. It had a footpath through it, so it was a bit of a nightmare for management because you couldn't put certain groups in there. So we so we just let that one go. And then what we didn't realize was that because that was on a footpath, everyone saw it, and then it became like a local famous place because everyone would write on Facebook, oh, you should go, there's a big old dead tree, so go to the field with the dead tree, there's insects like I've never seen before, or I haven't seen since my childhood, or I've never heard an insect noise like it. And then so that was like that was unreal, because we weren't even really trying to do it for the insects, at that point. But yeah, then realizing, what then that made us realize how the rest of the farm, even an organic farm, how we lacked that insect life everywhere, and how we could really simply do something to put that back. And then the other observations would be the way that animals grazed. For example, when you introduce a smaller space for them to be, and then moving them frequently, how it changed the behavior. So rather than going around and selectively grazing their favorite things down to nothing till that disappeared, we were seeing them go in and just snatching at mouthfuls and having thistles and having docks, and then over not too long a period, them actually just going for those things when they went into the field. It was almost like they went for it. It's not something they would normally eat, but like a mum and a kid, and have your vegetables, and they're like, oh, it's not that bad actually. And then they would go for the docks and that sort of thing. And then the regrowth of grass, really, from the first thing we ever did was split one field into 4. So instead of set stock grazing for 4 weeks, we grazed a week in each cell. By the time we left the final cell on week 4, weeks 1 was already in regrowth, and that was a like, yeah, we hadn't necessarily measured it. We didn't really think it would happen. People said it might, but I was like, oh wow, this is really happening. And one other observation that just now it's relevant to them, but we're actually really measuring it in detail, so I know it to be true. My knowing is that we're doing some work at the moment on the impact of chickens on ground, and the impact of where there's been nothing versus having livestock in a managed way. So where there's rest periods built in, but there is animal impact, is that the plant density is just getting so much more. So that kind of thing about when you look across a field and it looks green and you think it's full of grass, but you look down and you see lots of gaps in the sward, even in permanent pasture, that there's almost sometimes a 50% opportunity to grow more plants. And starting to see that, like, oh, we're actually, growing more, not that it's growing faster because it's been grazed and left, but actually we've got a better amount of plants for every square meter we've got on the farm.
Amazing. So interesting to hear. And just digging into, you know, when you did start to have these kind of anecdotal or observational based evidence to share with people, what did it feel like? Were you kind of embarrassed, or you know, like, was there a bit of fear that you didn't have the scientific data, or was it actually you were building confidence? And yeah, how
So
did it feel?
yeah, so to start with, it felt like, you know, fluffy, it's not real, you know, that sort of thing. Definitely felt it. But I sort of said a few things to a few people, and the reaction wasn't like, "Oh, you're a complete weirdo." It was like, "Oh, that's interesting," and then it helped build confidence. And then I realized that the kind of like missing link about storytelling in what we do, we become very reliant on factual scientific, which is important, but actually telling stories, because that someone wanted to come and make a video. And again, I was like, we've got nothing to, you know, I can't show you any data evidence yet, but I can tell you all the stories that we've experienced, some of these things I've shared, but also the you know, how we've been as a farm team, what we found easy, what we found hard. And then that kind of so then for every story that I told, or every thing that I said that wasn't backed with massive amounts of data, but was backed with experiences and observations and what we'd seen and felt and heard, then yeah, and then I realized that actually people were actually really interested in that, and in fact more interested. And I will always, I think the turning point for me was we did that video, and I've been writing reports and projects and doing stuff like that for all of my career, and I had more interaction with one video than I'd had in a lifetime of writing what I now realize to be pretty boring reports. So that completely, changed my perspective. And there's like this saying that stuck with me as well, that I heard early on. I can't remember who says it, but it's a famous quote. But when we change what we see changes. And my one tangible example of that I've thought about when I was thinking about this earlier, it was we had two fields, one side of the river and one the other. And the one the other side of the river is a triple SI, and it's full of like, it's nationally protected species diversity hay meadow, of which, because we've lost something like 98% of our meadows like that, so it's really valued. And on our side of the river, where we set stock graze all summer, loads of thistles, but it's really rough, so it was difficult to manage the thistles with topping, but we did our best. And there was all this thistle down like blowing around. We went down one day and it's like, oh god, this is a disaster. But Caroline was there, and she said, but look, it's all blowing over to the other field and everyone's panicking about the seeds, but none of it's taking in that species diverse meadow. And at that point, that was like a moment of like, oh, now I see it like that. And now everything I see changes.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that. Well, two things there I'd love to dig into. One is the role of Caroline in your learning journey. Um, and then the other is, yeah, kind of what it's felt like to change your way of seeing. So maybe first we'll jump into Caroline and we'll go back to different ways of seeing, or what it, yeah, how that's evolved. So I know that Caroline, we're talking about Caroline Grindrod, just to be clear to people, who you have co-created the Roots to Regeneration course with. And you referred to her as your coach earlier. So maybe you could just share a bit more about having Caroline with you along the way, and the role that she's played, and also how has she helped guide you with your observations, or has that influenced things? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so when we oh, I mean, it goes back to, you know, of course, the first thing I did was tell everybody that it would never work on this farm. So just to say that when it first got suggested that we consider looking at what they were doing in the States with amp grazing, I was like, well, spent great pleasure in writing to Alan Williams, who is Gabe Brown's business partner in Understanding Ag, telling him this will never work. Like, you know, he's most respected people on this topic in the world. And I was like, it won't work here, just to be clear. And then but then we thought, well, maybe we'll flip that on its head and, you know, let's see if it does work here. So that AMP project was, at that stage, it's crazy to say now, we're in such a short space of time where AMP grazing is regarded as a thing and so many people are doing it. Well, the question was, can adaptive multi-paddock grazing even work in the UK? And then of course I was like, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to learn how to do it. And that's where Caroline came in. And then of course I spent the next few week saying, I'm not interested in all that stuff. I want to know how many animals, how big the cell, and how often do I move them? Like the rest of it is just, I don't need to know. And of course, bit by bit, she wore me down. Well, and I realized that you do need to know. And you do need to tune into this stuff because every farm is so different. And through some lenses, that's part of the problem with maybe our more industrial agricultural model, where it is like one seed, one spray, one thing. You do this everywhere, no matter where you are in the globe. And then, of course, that's led unintentionally to degradation. So it took me a while to realize that. And luckily, she has a coaching approach and style, and she gently coached me through that process. But having someone, yeah, so she was hugely important just to kind of be there, yeah, to have someone to go through it. And then when we tried something and it worked, I could share in that glory with her. But when it wasn't working, or I didn't know what to do, or we were getting a lot of pushback, whether that be people in the village, our landlords, other people within the FAI business, like it's really hard to get your head around some of the changes we were making. Tall grass looks messy, and that sort of thing. And so yeah, it was really important to have like someone by my side, and for me that was Caroline. Yeah.
And even in the way you're talking, it sounds like she was helping to guide your ability to see, or you even said that with the phrase you shared. And I do wonder if there's something about, the first time you go and dig a hole, I don't know if you remember this, but maybe it wasn't your first time, but early on in digging holes, all holes sort of look the same initially. Um, and all fields look somewhat the same, or, and then there's something that shifts that allows you to actually see things in a different way, and all holes start to not look the same. And it sounds like having Caroline along with you really helped you to maybe stick at it, or maybe actually see things differently. But also, I wonder if part of it was just looking at more holes or looking at more fields, and taking that time, you actually do develop that skill set for yourself. I don't know what you think, maybe both. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, so I think the first time, apart from doing this at university, I actually contacted my friend that I did it with to be like, do you remember when we dug that hole? Like, I think this is a thing now that we do, which was crazy. So the first time I saw Caroline dig a hole, the first time we thought about digging a hole was when we were FAI. A lot of the farm is on the floodplain, so there was quite a bit of it fenced off, where parts of the river that the cattle weren't allowed access to. So the first thing she did was went down and dug a hole on the riverbank, and of course I was like, well, that's stupid because the cows aren't there. And of course she didn't even really need to dig. She could almost put her fingers in. It was so soft because we weren't grazing it. And then we went into the field, of course, and it was one of our like closest to the farm field, so grazed the most, and dug a hole there, and it was like, and the difference was just stark, just literally meters away. And of course the whole thing looked different, it felt different, it smelt different. And so that was the first like thing that she did that helped me appreciate the importance of digging holes, just to even know that, to say that if you can make this infield a little bit more like this over here, that is all biology, that's all going to do good things for you. And then when I dug my first hole on my own, yeah, I basically just dug it and stood there and looked at it. And actually, Tristan and I did a lot of the early work together, and some of you might have had interaction with him with Soil Mentor, but it's like, he's quite sciencey. I need to dig all these holes for this project. It was during COVID, and it was like, can you come and help me? And so we just like stood there and looked at these holes, and were kind of not really sure, but it didn't take long to tune in, and it became curious, like, oh, I wonder what it's like over there, and I wonder what it's like, and because we did that last year, or that's near the trees, and then that kind of like sparked a curiosity to dig more holes, basically.
Totally. So interesting. And I do wonder about this. There's something about the observational mindset, and then combined with the thinking part of it all, or the knowledge base, or like having some guidance, that is what allows you to come up with the context specific approach that is required for regenerative approach. That's just why I'm hearing a little bit, and I heard that in the last episode as well. I wonder, I have a few more questions for you, and then we'll go to general questions from people. But what would you say to a farmer that doesn't feel confident making decisions based on their observations yet?
Maybe practice.
Mm.
Try a little, try a little one out. And I think it's like you said early on, it's about not ignoring the thinking. It's just bringing some of the observational stuff more in balance with what we prioritize in the way we make decisions. But yeah, it would be to just try it, because I think I was pleasantly surprised. Like I said, I felt quite embarrassed saying it for the first time, and then people's response was like, oh, that's actually really interesting, and I wasn't expecting that. So it might not be as bad as you think, so I would just say give it a go.
Got it. And you told me that you had even written taking time for observations into your job descriptions for your team. Yeah, maybe you can tell me a bit more about that. How does that work?
Yeah, so it's yeah, it feels really counterintuitive. You said at the beginning, like versus the doing, and to actually my husband still struggles to get his head around it. He's like, what are you doing? Just what are you doing? I'm just looking. He's like, what? Do something else. But and it's not that we sit around all day just staring at cows, I have to say, but just yeah, so it's almost building in the permission that it's okay to do that. So and yeah, like I said, it's not about standing around, but taking 5 minutes after you fed the hens in the morning, let's say, to just stand and see how they're responding to this new bit of range, because we move all of our chickens like we move the cows. Or yeah, what like the example of the suckling cow, like just don't react straight away, just to spend that time observing. So it is written into job descriptions now, just so that people know that they've got permission to do it. Yeah, because it feels very like it's not productive, and therefore it can seem like a waste of time, as you said earlier. So yeah, it's important. I feel like it's important to write that in, and particularly when people, we want people that are more tuned into that way of being, and therefore hopefully that sort of thing appeals when, if we're recruiting or anything like that, then that kind of like brings in people that are tuned into that.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. And I can totally see if that wasn't in the job description, people would feel daunted, or like it wasn't allowed, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I just wanted to dig into now that you're working with what I would call, or maybe a more complex system, so more responding to observations rather than farming by recipe. I know you wanted your recipes in the beginning, but Caroline knocked it out of you. Yeah, how does that work for you? How does farming by observation rather than by recipe look different? And how do your day-to-day activities on farm look different? You just said you don't stand around all day observing, but how has it shifted?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think so. Actually, from the outside, I don't think you'd see much different. So we go out, we check cows, we move cows, we TB test, we do all of that stuff. I don't think you'd see that from the outside as any different. But it might be that we have, for example, made calving later to be more in tune with the weather, or lambing we did at the first thing we did, made it later to be more in tune with the weather and the grass availability, rather than previously pushing on getting lambs away earlier and having to creep feed them as a kind of like, that's one of the first shifts that we made. And the fact that we do a lot more planning now, so we make time for planning, and the grazing planning is of course about the grass, but it's actually everything else. It's what bulls are we going to use, homebred, what are we going to buy in, when will we bring them in, when will we take them out. All of that stuff is planned a lot more ahead of time. And then because there's more resiliency in the system, so a good example would be, well, that year, the first year we made lambing later, and everyone was like, what are you going to lamb in May for? That's mental. But then it ended up being a really cold spring where nothing started growing. So then everyone was having to buy in feed to feed more. And Humphrey, who I was working with at the time, he said, have you noticed that we're getting on with extra fencing jobs or maintenance or other things, whereas everyone else we know is running around like headless chickens, just trying to keep enough energy into the sheep. And so what we find is we get time freed up because of those sorts of things. And the drought this summer would be a good example. Like I say, we weren't totally free of it, but we held we were in drought. We knew the rain would come eventually. Rob Havard always says we're only one day closer to a next rainy day, or the other way around. When he said it to me in the winter, we're only one step closer to a dry day.
Yeah.
And so we knew the rain would come eventually. So instead of grazing everything we had in the hope the rain would come in time, we stopped the cows where they were. We intentionally fed some hay so that the grass ahead of us was acting soil armor. It was stopping the evaporation. Any dew that did appear was then soaking into the ground. It wasn't burning straight off. And then when the rain came, the ground was already slightly more moist. So when the rain came, the recovery was massive. And so those types of things mean that it's less up and down. And that gives us a bit more time and a bit more space to breathe.
Totally. Yeah. It's like a buffer. There's more buffer in the system.
Yes.
And it was interesting that you mentioned that you do a lot of planning. So, we're talking about although it's not farming by recipe, it's not completely random either. It is so you're doing a lot of planning and thinking. Maybe you could just share, how do the observations feed into that planning or link with it? Like it's kind of like they're layered somehow, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, so a few things like let's say observationally we see that a certain field has got a lot less or a lot more thistles this year. So we'll think about that when we do our grazing planning, one of the things we think about is like weeds. What fields do we want to try and tackle this year from a weeds point of view? And how will we bring the cattle in to do that? So what weed is it? Like, is it bracken? Is it thistles? Is it nettles? When are they most likely to graze? Or what point in the life cycle of that weed is that, will grazing and trampling have the best effect in knocking it back? I mean, the first thing we always look at is, why do we have that weed? Is it compaction? Is it excess nitrogen? Whatever it might be, like, what do we want to get on top of? So then we'll use that observation and say, right, we really want to get on top of, really going to hit the bracken hard in field X. So we're going to graze it in months this point and this point, and we want to bring bring that in. Or what's our wettest field, and so when might we want to rest that or to graze that. And then as we're going through the year on our grazing plan, we would record things like, how settled were the cattle? Were they all content and calm, or were they a bit like, we want to move, even though it's not time for a move, and they've got grass there but they're not eating it? So then you build up this picture over the year and you go, oh, actually in Orchard View they were really unsettled in the spring, but they were actually fine when we grazed it again late summer. Or actually they were unsettled every time we put them in there. And so those we do record what we're doing, not laboriously. It's like 3 tick sheet things that we look at. And so so that those observations are not just like floating around in someone's head, and nor are they just floaty. It's not just like, oh, isn't it great, we stand around looking at everything all day. Like, we take that information and then turn it into something useful to help us plan better for the following year.
So interesting. So the observations, it's very structured observation. And that's how it works across the team. Because I guess it's one thing when you observe on your own, it's another when you're having a team who are observing together, and having to work with a plan and optimize and iterate on the plan.
Yeah, I mean, thank God for WhatsApp. Like, what do we do before we could voice note each other all day on what we were seeing? Like, I mean, that would be our one main tool, is for that daily stuff. Like, seen this, thinking this, what about that? And that's made it brilliant for sharing. And then and then the more formal things, like, were they settled? Did it rain that day? So we have a rain gauge where we measure, but we're also just kind of getting a bit of a picture for, how many days of this month have we had rain on the ground, and is that why we're growing more or less grass than we think we should? And that type of thing. So some of it's more informal, and then some of it more formal.
Got it. Clear. Okay, I do have a few questions, but I am going to just ask you one more. And that is, has all this, I know you've only been farming at this farm for 4 years or so, but just in all of your learnings, has this affected your bottom line? Or maybe at FAI you could comment on it more. But yeah, do you have any comments on that? Just the switching to a more observation-based approach to farming.
So What it definitely does is knocks costs on the head, inputs, because we really focus on doing as much as we can for free. So sunlight and water.
Mhm.
And then and then what yeah, and then what it does is free up time to be able to do other things. So to add value or to add another enterprise. And what we also see, Caroline would say when she came here versus the other year she's been here this spring, she's like, there's just this abundance. So we now get with the same cattle number of cows, and we've got the chickens, and we've introduced a whole new meat chicken enterprise this year. But I'm already like, now we could actually have goats. We're growing so much other things, like we actually need something to eat it. So around the edges, there's the grass is growing, but the hedges are growing much more, the trees are growing much more, we're getting scrub coming up now. Some people, we might freak at scrub, but I'm like, oh, a bit of scrub, great. What loves scrub? Goats, you know. So we could actually have a pasture based goat enterprise here, so we would layer that on our yeah, certainly at FAI they've got some statistics around, for example, costs of outwintering, on doing bale grazing, rolled out bales versus in wintering, you know, on AHDB numbers is a significant saving each day. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. You're right, we're a new farm. It was totally dilapidated when we came here. So but we are on a trajectory for profitability. And what I feel is confident in that. So yes, we might have some fluctuations in chicken feed price, but we're working on maybe insect protein or something else to help ease those out. But you know, whatever happens, we're not, yeah, with the cattle in particular, you know, nothing really changes. So we know that is just, we're not got no inputs whatsoever apart from a few minerals. And so that's what it brings, is a total level of resilience. And yeah, I think many people you know, have got some great case studies, and we will get to that point where we've got case studies of profitability. I'm really confident of that.
Yeah, and it is interesting that it is also, not only is it reducing costs, but it is also reducing your exposure to markets. And that's the highly unpredictable bit of it all. So
Yeah.
again, it's that buffer in the
Yes.
profitability zone as well. Interesting. Okay, I'll just jump to some questions. So we had a question well, I'm just going to respond to this one question I saw someone just asked. Is you referred to your tick sheet for recording. You had 3 ticks. Would that be something you'd be happy to share? Are you
Yeah,
looking back at
I'm looking I'm looking around trying to see it because I can only remember the so firstly we record where the cows have been. We've got a grazing sheet that we use, that we've actually developed ourselves. And so we do help farmers with grazing planning if anyone's interested in that. But so I'm turning my head around to just try and look, but I can't see it because of course under pressure all I can remember, but I can definitely share that
We could share
with
it
Abby.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And someone also asked which breed of cattle, and do you have any thoughts on the best breeds for low input grass-fed beef?
Yeah, so we're Angus, and we're not Angus because I necessarily wanted to go Angus, but we wanted genetics from a system similar to us. So we wanted to buy them from somewhere where they had been doing tall grass grazing, so the rumen development was there. So I went to Rob Havard. He didn't actually have any for sale at the time, but he has got a big sale either about to happen or has just happened. And now I'm like, oh, if only we were buying cows now. But I wanted that because he's been selectively breeding in that system. I think that so I think that's important, maybe more than breed, because there'd be some really intensive grain-fed Angus and there'd be some really extensive Angus. And of course they evolve the epigenetic expression of animals born on a farm. That's also really important. So often if you already have cattle, even if they are continental, you know, really intense breeds, actually there'll be still something about the epigenetics on that farm, and it might be that introducing some other genetics is the way to go, rather than just selling everything and buying in new, because that can create other problems with disease. And there's something about cattle knowing the farm. So I think anything as far as what's a good breed is just anything that is anything that will do better off lower. So any of the native breeds really is a kind of good place to start. And then potentially anything on the breeds at risk register, because then you can get supplements through countryside stewardship and things if that's your thing.
Great, thank you. And then we had a question about, do you weigh your calves and work with daily live weight gains in your current system?
Yeah, we do. So we don't weigh at birth. don't want to get involved at that stage. We're just wanting to be as intervention free as possible. But we would be weighing basically, if they're in the handling system, and we've got time, then we weigh. So we probably weigh a few times a year. And yeah, so we're working on, I think that we're about a 0.8 8 to 8.5 kilograms of daily live weight gain lifetime. So we're finishing at around the next ones that will finish for us will be 20, they'll finish at sort of 24, 25, 26 months. And that seems to be about normal for us. So yeah, we're happy with that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And from Mambud in Sierra Leone, he says, my community is polluted with previous years' use of chemical fertilizer. Do you have any tips on step-by-step restorative tools he could use to build a more living soil?
Oh, wow. Yeah. What there is definitely when it has been heavily, artificial things have been used, it does take some transition time. But it is just amazing how things spring back, actually. So it's really hard to know if is it grazing, is it cropping, but just building in, I think that my one message would be the tool of rest is the most underused tool that we have. I'm not saying rewild and shut everything off and never use it again, but learn about the tool of rest and think about how you can build that into your system. So building rest into a grazing rotation. And on cropping land, maybe not doing anything, but cover cropping, and intercropping, and the other things like that would be the best thing you could do to start to recover that.
Great. Thank you. Okay, and then, well, we just have a comment here. But Nettie is saying, thank you, this is so refreshing. I'm a vet, so observe and think at work all the time using information. And with her own small flock of South Downs on limited grazing options, she's recently found herself starting to observe so many things. But it's just working out whether it's useful info and then working out what to do about it. And she's been accused of overthinking, for example, the grazing behaviors in different fields. And she's also started amp grazing. And this webinar has given her the confidence to stop and stare with permission.
Brilliant.
So
That's
thank you.
my job is done.
Yeah, no, I think that is really, it's something that isn't talked about that often. And really that is what we're trying to do here is, in a way, it's almost hard to articulate, I think. And just trying to draw out exactly what do we mean when we talk about observation, because I think people refer to observation a lot, but it's not always clear what exactly it means. And it can feel very daunting at first, I think, just stopping and staring, especially when you don't necessarily know what you're looking for. So I do actually have one more question for you, Claire, before we finish up, which is, what are you most excited about for the farm in the year ahead?
Ooh. What am I most excited about? Well, I'm actually going to go and dig more holes, because following the visit the other day, and so I hadn't done anything for a while, and I was excited about that. But probably on the farm, I'm most excited about our chickens, our dual purpose chickens. And I got an email this week from someone who's vegan but needs to start eating eggs again, and wanted to be able to eat our eggs, because we are working on not culling male laying hen chicks, which is a big problem. And I felt like, wow, I've got vegans happy to come and eat our eggs. And I think that's a really exciting change of tide and a really exciting time to kind of develop things into the future.
So cool. And I saw Adam has also posted a message here which just said, I can't find pastured hen's eggs. When are your eggs back in season? And how can I get them in Oxfordshire? I think he's coming on 21st of May to see the farm.
In it Our eggs aren't available in Oxford. So are we getting, so we're in Shropshire now. Yeah, and they don't do eggs at FAI at the Oxford farm anymore. But the place I would always recommend in that area would be North Aston Organics. We supply them. They're just opening a new farm shop there, and we supply our chicken to them, not our eggs, because it's a bit too far away. But get in touch on our website. My email address is info@plantonfarm.co.uk, and then I can answer any of those questions.
Okay, another question. They're just coming in now. So do you always avoid grazing down hard or mowing short at any time of the year?
So mowing, I'll tick that one first. It's always hard not to mow short when you're trying to take a crop of grass. And also most contractors don't want to adjust the cutting height, especially for us because we're tiny. So we end up having to mow short. But of course, with mowing, it's built into the culture of what we do as farmers, isn't it? It's to conserve grass. But actually, when you look at it through the lens of nature, it's when we have the longest day length. June and July is when we've got the most sunshine landing on our fields, and then we chop all of those solar panel leaves down and turn them into hay, and then that's actually energy that we could be cycling through the system. So when we're making hay at the moment, because we still need hay in our system, our end game is to not need it, is to have enough standing forage to go into. But at the moment, we still need hay. So when we're cutting that, we are going short, but we rotate which fields we do that in, and we try to think about where we can do that with the least damage. I never graze down to short anymore at all, ever. Yeah.
Definitive answer.
Yeah.
Okay, and then finally, we opened the bag of worms with the dual purpose chickens, because Sinead asked, what breed are your dual purpose chickens, please?
So this is what the work is to do, to find out the project, to work out what breeds work. So www.impeccablepoultry.co.uk is the website on that. And we are currently working with a Gris Andre, which is like a speckledy, which is okay, but we could do with it being a little bit more meaty. So we've got kind of further things in development on that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting to watch and hear, and we're excited to see how it goes. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We've answered lots of questions, and just thank you so much, Clare, for sharing your learnings. It's so rich, and it's really brilliant to hear from you always. And also thank you to everyone who's tuned in and asked questions and listened. And if you enjoyed this session, please do sign up to our newsletter to find out about further episodes. And you can also head to the Regen Soils Hub on our website to rewatch this or watch previous episodes. And if you'd like to find out more about Soil Mentor and how it can support you in building an observation mindset and making your observations as valuable as possible, then please do email us info@vitacycle.com or head to soils.vitacycle.com and you can sign up to hear more. We will be sending out an email newsletter with this recording, and also with the links that Clare has referred to, Impeccable Poultry, Planton Farm. I know you do some educational days at Planton Farm, so people can come and learn and see how your system works, as well as, of course, the Roots to Regeneration course, which is, a 2-year course, so more of a learning journey, if that's what is exciting for people.